Welcome, John Hamer. How are you, my friend?
Very well, thank you, Guy. Thanks very much for the invite. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
I'm honoured to have you on. I
Oh,
really
thank you.
am, because I've been following you for some time, and I really
Great.
appreciate you giving the time to me to do this.
It's my
Ha-
pleasure. It's not a problem.
You were down my neck of the woods the other day, weren't you? You were in
I
Totnes giving
was.
a talk.
Yeah.
So how did
Yeah.
that go?
Yeah, it went pretty well. I was. It was meant to be at the Royal Seven Stars Hotel in Totnes, which is the biggest hotel in Totnes, and that was all set up. And then we actually arrived in Totnes on the Thursday. I was due to speak on the Saturday. The Saturday just gone. Um, And then on the Friday, the lady who organised it, lovely lady, Catherine, she she phoned me up almost in tears. I mean, she was distraught because we've been cancelled. So
Ah,
yeah, the hotel decided that they didn't want me speaking there for whatever reason. And that's the first time it's ever happened, apparently, at the Royal Seven Stars. And I think it's the fact that my reputation preceded me. I'm constantly being cancelled. It's not the first time it's happened. In fact, it's happened many, many times. As soon as our establishments get wind of the fact that it's me that's speaking, suddenly somehow I become persona non grata, non gratis. And but anyway, all's well that ended well on that occasion. She found a venue. It was her own venue at the last minute, and around 40 people came, which was very nice. We had I talked about the fraudulent money system
mm.
and how that works, and yeah, it was received very well, very well. So we had a good night.
This is something that happened to Richard Vobes recently. He said that he had a talk planned in Glastonbury, and that was
Right.
cancelled at the last minute. And it
Yeah,
seems that there are people out there that are looking at who's going to be speaking at certain events, and they're obviously
yeah,
interfering.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, there's a group in Stroud apparently called Stroud Against Hate, and they hate me. So sort out the irony of that. And
right.
apparently it was this group that contacted a similar group in Totnes. I'm not sure what they're called, probably something similar. And it was them that put pressure on the hotel through whatever means. Nobody knows how or why or what the contacts are there. Maybe it's something to do with Freemasonry. Who knows? I don't know. I'm only speculating there. And it was them that actually managed to convince the hotel that it was not a good idea to have me speaking. So yeah, I mean, these people who are allegedly, purportedly against hate are the ones that hate, as far as I can tell. I don't
Well,
hate anybody, not even them.
the information you're putting out there is as far as I can see, and from and I've read the falsification of history, and it's helping. It's helping us. Your work helps us realize what's going on. Why would anybody hate that?
Well, helps us, but it doesn't help the establishment. That's the point.
No.
And anybody who's deeply entrenched within the establishment's way of thinking isn't going to appreciate the stuff that I tell because I tell the truth, warts and all. And I always say this as well, Guy. I don't have an agenda. My only agenda is the truth. I don't have any axe to grind about anything. All I'm interested in is the truth. And that's what my research is designed to do, and that is suss out the truth and then spread it because we are the general public is never told the truth about anything hardly. So it's my I look at it point as my job, my task to fulfill that role in telling the truth. But of course the establishment don't appreciate it because it goes against their insidious agenda.
Mm. What do you think their agenda is ultimately?
Well, it's manifold, but it's um, currently the big focus is control, depopulation. We've seen that in the last few years.
Mm.
The 2 year free trial of the New World Order that we had. And yeah, and yeah, they're really stepping it up now. I mean, the world, the country, it's just turning to shit, isn't it? I mean, excuse
Yes.
my language, but I think about life 10 years ago, and it was totally different to what it is now. Now we're all living in fear, which is another thing that they absolutely want, because fearful people are much easier to control. And it's every day on the news. I mean, I don't particularly watch the news, but I get to know after the event, kind of thing. They are constantly pumping fear at us, wars, diseases, famines. It was always bad, but now it's just gone into overdrive. And I believe that's because of something called Agenda 2030. They are stepping up their agenda to bring in their new world order that they want to see, which is a kind of a totalitarian state, and we would be, under their total control at that point. This is what they want. This is what they're aiming for. So I think this is why the agenda has stepped up. But I've really noticed a difference in the last few years, the way, where society is heading. It's just horrendous, and especially with this absolutely appalling government that we've got. I mean, this government is just extreme. I don't think there's been a more extreme government than that we've ever seen before. It's just outrageous what they're doing or trying to do and get away with.
Whenever I see Keir Starmer, I can't help. Sorry, there's a little bit of an echo coming from when I speak. Just initially, sorry.
It's okay.
Whenever I see Keir Starmer, I am instantly reminded of Jimmy Savile.
Well, he protected Jimmy Savile, didn't he?
Yes,
When he
yes. A lot of
was he the prosecutor,
Crown prosecution. Yeah,
Crown prosecutor. Yeah, he protected
mm,
Jimmy Savile, and he covered up Jimmy Savile's crimes,
yeah,
knowingly. So he's part of the furniture. He's part of the establishment. Totally, in my view, totally owned and controlled and dictated to by the WEF, the
mm,
WHO, and the UN. All those three, and of course, where does that end? The World Bank, the BIS, the Committee of 300, all linked, at the senior level. And, Starmer is just their puppet, basically, as would anybody else be that replaced him, so people call him for his head. And it's kind of a futile exercise in a way, because no matter who's in power, they will all be controlled by the same entities.
yeah, definitely.
The same agenda will prevail.
I keep telling people that, what is the point in voting? Because you go left to right, and then occasionally something in the middle appears, like Farage, and we think that it's a possible alternative. But what they don't realise is it's the system that doesn't work,
Exactly.
and it's pointless voting. And I always say it's two cheeks of the same arse, with Farage as the sphincter.
I love that. Yeah, well, I always say, I have a little glib saying that. I always say to people, don't ever vote. It only encourages them. And the other thing is, if you vote, it's pointless because the government always gets in.
Yes. There's only one person that ever entered that building with any, well, good and honest intentions. And look what happened to
Guy
him.
Fawkes.
Yeah, my namesake. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Who do you think sits right at the very top? Who do you think that the WHO, WAF, the UN, who do you think they actually report to? Have you got any views on that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, guys, it's a tricky one. My views change; they drift in and out over time. I think, oh yeah, it's probably this, it's probably that. I mean, the central banking system, which is run by the Rothschilds, as most people know, is obviously very, very influential. But as to kind of putting my finger on one single entity or one single person, I just don't think that's possible. Personally, I'd love to be contradicted and for somebody to explain to me who that would be or what that would be. But no, I can't put my finger on exactly what it is. But it's a conglomeration of different people, different organisations, different vested interests. It's such a morass of interlocking, entities up there at the top. But I mean, of course, it's obfuscated deliberately. They don't want us to know who's there
No.
and who's doing it. So it's a tricky one.
I sometimes wonder if there, and I've seen a little bit to suggest that this is the case, that these 13 bloodline families that we hear about all the time aren't
Mm,
the families that are really in control. There are another 13 hidden families, but I just think that
Right.
that might be a distraction because the
Yeah,
Rothschilds seem to
yeah, I
they pop
agree.
up too often.
Yeah, I definitely, of course, if they don't want us to know, they're going to obfuscate it, aren't they? And
Mm.
that's probably, I think you're probably right there. It's probably an obfuscation of some kind. Um,
What? Sorry, John. What got you on this journey? How old were you when you suddenly started thinking this isn't right and started investigating things?
mm, I
How
was
long
in my,
ago?
I was in my, oh, what was I was in my mid 40s, I think, which is 27 years ago. And yeah, it was the death of Diana that actually kind of made me sit up and think and start looking down rabbit holes. And again, apologise to anyone listening out there who's heard me tell this story because I feel like it's a broken record. I tell it all the time. And that is, we had some friends, my wife at that time and I, we had some friends who were in Paris that weekend. It was a August bank holiday weekend, wasn't it?
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and they'd been out for a meal in the evening, as you do. They went back to the hotel room, flopped on the bed, switched on the TV. They weren't drunk or anything. They'd had a couple of glasses of wine, but that was all. And the first images that they saw on the TV were of Diana walking into the ambulance unaided. Now, they met us a few days later and said,
What? I've not seen that.
no, well, okay, I'll continue with it because it's interesting, right? So I said, no, we met them for a coffee, I think, maybe the following week or a few days later. And I said, no, you can't, you must be wrong because we know that Diana was carried unconscious into the ambulance. She never regained consciousness. And they said, well, that's what we saw. Said it was all in French. We couldn't understand a word of it, but we could clearly see the images. We're not blind. And I said, right. Yeah, well, I mean, she was a very recognizable woman, wasn't she? It wasn't somebody that you weren't going to recognize. So I started looking into it because I was interested. I've always been a curious person. I've never, ever been one to accept authority, ever. Even at school, I used to get into terrible trouble because I, I wouldn't accept authority in any way at all. I fought back all the time. Just my character, so where I've always been. I was like that with my parents, but anyway, I digress. So I started looking into it, and at that time, my wife at that time, she was secretary to a guy called Stephen Dorrell. Now, there was an MP at that time called Stephen Dorrell, but amazingly, it wasn't him. It was a different Stephen Dorrell, and it was the Stephen Dorrell who wrote a book, a best-selling, a Times top 10 best-selling book called MI6, which was an expose of the British Secret Services and all the shenanigans they get up to. And I started reading this book, and I was like, wow, gosh, I didn't realize all this stuff went on because it's not the sort of stuff that you hear on the news or read in the papers. And of course, that was my only source of information at that time, as it is with most people's even today. But yeah, so I started reading this stuff, and I thought, wow, that's crazy. And then when he started his next book, which was about Oswald Mosley, the
Yes.
BUF leader during the war, he gave her books, big piles of books with little post-it notes stuck on them and bits that he wanted to quote out of them. And I was reading these books as well, and I can't remember what the books were now, what they were called, but I just remember thinking, I've never seen books like this before. They were exposing the lies of the establishment, and it just pushed me down this rabbit hole. And about 3 years later, I did it kind of on a ad hoc part-time basis, just finding bits of information and trying to pass them on to friends and family who absolutely ridiculed me, as you would expect.
Yeah.
And about 3 years later, I was made redundant from my job in IT. I'd worked in IT all my life up to that point. So that gave me the opportunity to then start doing this kind of full time. So I started writing. And then in about 2001, I think it was, I actually stumbled across it by accident, that very same clip that had been shown on French TV, except it was a BBC clip with Martin Lewis, the broadcaster.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was the British version of that clip with Martin Lewis presenting it. And apparently, what had happened, I found out subsequently, was that clip had been shown immediately after the accident when the news crews got there, because what tends to happen is whenever there's a kind of a false flag, and Diana was a false flag, obviously, whenever there's a false flag, the first news reports that come out are often the most accurate ones until they've sorted the agenda out and the BBC
Mm.
and all the nationwide and the worldwide media becomes aware that this is not what we want to tell the people. Then those clips somehow leak out. And then as soon as they found, the powers that be find that they're leaking out, they put a stop to it and they delete them and they never see them again. Well, apparently that those clips were shown only once and then they were pulled, obviously. But somebody had been astute enough at that point in time to actually save it on some kind of a file. I don't know what files they would use in those days, but that's irrelevant. And then it had been left on the internet. And I wished that I'd saved it because a few days later I went back to find it and it had gone. Not unsurprisingly, but I wished I'd kept it because that would have been a catalyst to wake a lot of people up, I think. So yeah, that was a very long, convoluted story, but that was my waking up experience.
That's completely changed my perspective on what happened because,
Yeah.
as I had believed that she was in a bad state when they got there, and they drove around and around and around, and it took a
Mm.
lot longer than it should have done to get her to the
Well,
hospital.
yes.
Died
Mm.
en route, and
Yeah.
that was it was all planned to be that way. But I
Yeah.
hadn't heard that she was actually able to walk away from the
I,
accident.
Absolutely. I've seen it with my own eyes now, Guy, and you can't unsee it, obviously. But yeah, I mean, she wasn't. She was a little bit groggy. But she wasn't being held. I mean, they were just. I think from memory, they were just holding her elbow and guiding her up the steps into the ambulance. That's all. But she was definitely walking. So
So
the
what do you think
story that we've
happened
heard is
next?
absolute nonsense.
What do you think happened next?
I think they drove her somewhere in the ambulance and killed her, basically.
Right. Every now and again, I think that she was retired to a desert island somewhere.
No, no,
No.
I don't. I mean, I don't know for sure, obviously, but my gut feeling tells me no. I hear all these stories. Oh, Princess Diana's still alive. She's living with Elvis on a desert island.
Mm,
Nowadays it's an exaggeration, but you know the kind of thing.
yeah.
Um, no, I don't subscribe to that view personally. I believe that she was killed. They wanted her. They wanted her dead. They didn't want her just out of the way. They wanted her dead. They didn't want to take a risk on her ever coming back into circulation and saying the stuff that she was saying. People say to me, "Well, why do you think they murdered her?" Myriad of reasons, but I think the main one, I really do think the main one was because she was taking away the popularity of the royal family. The royal family's popularity was going down the tubes because of her. Everyone was on her side against Charles. They all thought she'd been badly treated and the royal family were a bunch of arseholes, etc., etc. And I think that was the main reason. But there was also other stuff like the week after she died, she was due to speak to a huge worldwide anti-landmine conference. And she was a very, very influential woman. When she spoke, people
Mm.
listened. She wasn't the brightest lamp in the street, bless her, but she knew how to capture an audience, and she knew how to get things across that maybe the establishment didn't want to be put across. So she was very, very influential in that respect. And again, that was another reason. So
I used to live in North. Oh, sorry, I've still got this sort of feedback coming through. I used to live in Northampton. We lived in Northampton for years until we moved to Devon, and
yeah,
a couple of my friends that we got to know over the years. The wife worked in a pub near Althorpe called the Fox and Hounds. It's just
okay,
outside a village called Duston, and
yeah,
that was her local.
right,
And I said to my friend's wife, did you ever see her come in? And she said, yeah, she used to come in quite often,
right,
back in the early days,
yeah, yeah,
when she was a lady.
mm-hmm.
And she was quiet as a mouse, apparently. You wouldn't even know she was there, wouldn't say boo to a goose, kept herself to
Yeah,
herself.
yeah,
Um, and then when I don't know if this is true or not, but when she separated from Charles, she wanted to move back to Althorpe, and her brother wouldn't allow that. He said that he didn't want the press there. He didn't want the paparazzi hounding
Yeah,
him and hanging out outside. And then, of course, as soon as she dies, he turns the place into a bloody mausoleum for her.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I believe that he was, maybe not, I was going to say complicit, but I don't think he was complicit as such, but I think he knows the truth about what happened, without a doubt.
Mm,
Definitely do. Yeah. And of course, he's part of the establishment himself, isn't it? So he's not going to rock any
yes.
boats.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm, yeah.
Where are you with the royals? Do you think that we are going to continue to have a royal family? Because a lot of people suggest that, perhaps this will be, Charles might be the last, and it's a dying
Mm, mm,
industry because it's a business, isn't it?
yeah.
The
I don't.
firm,
I
I
mean, I
think she
don't.
called
To be
it.
honest, guy, I don't really deal in speculation. I mean, I can give you my opinion, but that's all it is. I think that eventually it will die out, whether that's in our lifetimes or at some point. But it's such an outdated, ridiculous institution. But then again, you see they're part of the fabric of the establishment. They are just as much up to their scrawny, evil little necks in it as the Rothschilds, for example.
Yeah.
So, will we ever get rid of them? Who knows? Maybe if there's a revolution, yes. But I don't know. It's only my opinion. I can't speculate on it, and I can't pronounce anything with any kind of authority really on that topic.
So Diana really was what woke you up, or and like you said earlier on, you don't. It's not the best expression in the world, but it's the one we're kind of stuck with. It's a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit like when people band around conspiracy theory and
yeah.
almost as if it's a form of ridicule. And I often say to people, do you understand what conspiracy theory means? It's someone researching into the fact that a group of people have conspired against us. These aren't
Exactly.
people
Yeah,
you should be
yeah,
attacking. These are people that are trying to help and share information with people they don't know that might help or might could save a life, depending on what it is we're exposing.
yeah.
And I think it's such an awful term, but
It is.
we're kind of stuck with it. So she woke you up, for want of a better expression. What was your next investigation? What did you dive into after Diana?
Yeah, lots of little things. It was mainly history. I mean, that's always been my focus, really, if you like, history. So yeah, it was mainly historical events, such as, for example, what one of the things that I found out was about Churchill, about his background and what an evil so and so he was, and all about him. He was a paedophile, he was a murderer. He ordered people's murders. Lord Kitchener was one of them. Yeah, the HMS Hampshire, where Kitchener allegedly died, that was all a complete farce, really. What happened there? They sunk that ship just to dispose of Kitchener. 600 plus men died on that, and I think there were 12 survivors who landed in a small boat on the Norfolk coast, and they were immediately shot. And the reason that they were shot was that they say that the locals thought they were German invaders,
Oh, that's
but no,
incredible.
they just shot them. So I mean, obviously they knew the truth and they didn't want it to get out. Again, that's a story. That's an article in one of my books. But yeah, just things like that, little things like the history behind the two wars, for example, is completely not what they tell us. Obviously, they happened, all the events happened, but not in the way and not for the reasons that they tell us. And that's a whole fabrication in itself, as are most things, to be fair. But then the next biggie for me was obviously 9/11. As soon as 9/11 happened, I knew immediately that it was all bollocks, because I was thoroughly down the rabbit holes by that point in time. 4 years had gone by since Diana's death, and yeah, I was well versed in it. And
Was there anything in particular that stood out to you?
well, yeah, the first thing that I thought of, I mean, it's kind of old hat now, but everybody kind of knows this now. But how on earth can jet planes slice into a building in the way that they did? Planes made of aluminium trying to penetrate through steel girders and concrete. For a start, the wings would have fallen off the planes. And I just thought, That's absolute nonsense. And then when the second plane hit, you know, I just knew it was some kind of a false flag. I didn't know what. I mean, I didn't know what the hell was going on, really, just like most people didn't. But I just knew there was something damned fishy about it. And obviously, as the days passed, you know, the sordid truth began to come out. And yeah, so that was the next major thing. Yeah, but at that
And
point in time, as most people are today, even people in the truth movement like ourselves, um, they're all living in fear. You know, on my stand-up talks, one of the things I say at the end usually is that, you know, whatever you do, don't let the fear factor get to you, because this is what they want. Because people say to me, "How do you live with all this stuff all the time, John?" And the answer is, I don't. I don't. I compartmentalize it. I put it in a little box in the recesses of my mind, and I only bring it out when I want to, like when I'm doing podcasts, when I'm writing, when I'm talking. The rest of the time, I say to people, and this is the way I live my life, I enjoy my friends, I love my family. I wake up every morning and think it's lovely to be alive, even in these shitty times, you know, and every day when you get to my age is a bonus anyway. So um, you know, it's a case of just trying to just focus on it when you need to, and not when you don't, because it will destroy your life. And that's how I used to live for the first must have, at least 10 years, 12 years of doing this. It nearly killed me. You know, the fear factor is just absolutely debilitating. I don't know whether you experienced that or not when you kind of first
oh
became aware,
God.
or
The, it's funny because I have that conversation quite often with my brother, and he says to me that quite often he says to me that he doesn't understand how I can carry all of this information around with me that's so negative
yeah,
and
yeah,
try and be positive. And
yeah, yeah,
my answer to that is that I do what you do in a lesser scale. I write about what I believe is going on. I share information and I share my thoughts. And if I don't know it to be true, I'll say that this is what I believe.
exactly.
What do you think? And this is a theory I have, but I think that by sharing this information, it's a positive thing. That you know, have you heard of Max Egan?
Yes, of course, yeah,
So
yeah,
a few years back now, I said to him that it was Max that really introduced me to Tartaria, and
okay,
I said to him that I'm talking to people about this and I'm sharing the information online with people, and I'm on BitChute, which is now gone,
yeah,
and I'm doing my best to try and spread the news, but no one's listening. And he said, "Brother, if you wake one person up, you might have saved someone's life."
very true, very true,
I
very
think
wise
if we
words, those, aren't they?
Yeah, and I just thought because once you can get someone to understand that our history has been falsified,
Yeah,
um, then you're going to question everything, and maybe that would stop you taking a medical intervention if it was offered.
exactly, yeah,
And
yeah.
that's kind of the only way to look at it.
And frankly, there is nothing we as individuals can directly do about it. Okay, we can spread information, but we can't actually change the world on our own. So, what is the point of worrying about it? I'm, you know, this is something else that I say. I'm what they call a fatalist. Okay, what I mean by that is, for those who have not come across that word, I believe that everything is mapped out. I believe that, you know, our lives follow a pattern that we're meant to follow, and yeah, we can deviate little sub branches off that path, but eventually it will push us back onto that path that we're meant to go on. And so my attitude is very blasé. It is, if I'm going to get knocked down by a bus tomorrow, so be it. There's nothing I can do about it. If I'm going to get bumped off by the security services, that's what's meant to happen. So why worry? Because worrying is not going to alleviate the situation at all. Just me. I don't expect everybody to believe that, but it just happens to be what I believe.
Have you had any sort of weird situations where you've had
No,
no, nothing like that?
no, I haven't. I mean, I've had, as we said before, I've had uh, been cancelled, you know, on many, many occasions, too many to remember. But nobody's actually physically or nobody's actually physically threatened me or threatened to threaten me.
Yeah,
No, so I've never had anything like that. There's always the first time, and if there is, well, we'll just handle it as it comes. But it doesn't stop me from doing what I do, because, like I say, I'm a fatalist. I believe that if that does happen at some point in time, then that's what was meant to happen. And I
that
have
was
no
supposed to
control
happen.
over it.
Yeah. I was given a talk in North Devon a few weeks ago, and right at the end in the Q&A, somebody said to me, you've written about the Freemasons, and you were a Freemason in London, right? In the city. I was at the Grand Lodge of the United Kingdom. That's where I met, and I went there for a long time. Obviously now they wouldn't let me through the front door, but they said, "Are you not concerned that in the middle of the night, blah blah blah?" And I said, "Do you know what? It's not something I think about until somebody like you raises it." And now it's going to be on my mind until I wake up
Miss,
tomorrow morning.
Mr. Negative. Yeah,
But that's the idea, isn't it? It's the fear, if
it's a
if, if
fear. Yeah,
that's what they want. And I think these,
yeah.
I consider them to be very low vibrational,
Mm,
uncreative, unsympathetic
yeah.
uh, people. And perhaps with going back to Diana and Charles, I remember when they announced their engagement that Charles quite famously said when they were asked, "What's it like to be in love?" He actually said, "Well, whatever that means."
I know. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, he wouldn't know, would he?
No, no, they don't. They're cold-blooded, cold-hearted psychopaths, basically, and that's how they're raised.
Mm.
They're raised to become that because the only way they can do what they do is if they have no empathy to, you know, for people who are victims of what they do.
Do you
So,
have any
they're raised
thoughts
from
on?
being this big, and I'm sat down, to be to be psychopathic in nature. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think that that's something that is shared with? For me personally, I have a unpleasant feeling about William, but Harry, I still sit on the fence with. I'm not sure what's
Mm,
going on there.
yeah. To be honest, I don't take a lot of notice of current affairs, especially world current affairs. I mean, I understand broadly what's going on. I know he's been kind of banished, exiled, or whatever, whether it be through his own volition or whether he was forced abroad, I don't know. But I suspect it's something to do with his mother's death, to be honest. I know that the two boys at the time, there was a lot of shall we say, speculation, perhaps more than speculation, perhaps real stuff that was coming out where the boys had obviously understood that what the story that they were being told about their mother's death wasn't quite accurate. And William was very outspoken when he was 14 years old about it. He was old enough to be a mature young lad, and he knew what was what by that age. And I remember seeing a quotation in one of the papers, and I can't remember it verbatim, but it was to the effect that you know he was very angry with the powers that be over his mother's death, and I suspect that is what's going on with Harry to a certain degree. It might not be the whole story, but I think that's possibly, and I think Harry is a bit of a rebel, and he's come to not to blows, but he's come to argue with his family about it. I think that's perhaps what it is. William's a different case because William has got different responsibilities to Harry because he's the heir, and he has to be brought into line by the establishment, even though they are the establishment. He has to behave in a certain way, and he has to um, accept his responsibilities in that regard. Because if he doesn't, then the future would be very, very, very bleak for him, and I think he probably understands that. But I'm
It's
sure
amazing how
that sorry.
I was just going to say it's amazing how quickly we can forget things, isn't it? Because
Mm,
people have forgotten about what happened to Diana. It's not talked about now,
no.
and I wonder what does it take? I mean, Andrew is exactly the same situation. His relationship with Epstein, and 5 minutes later he's back out in the public, and why do people forget? Why aren't we still asking why this has been allowed to
Yeah,
slide?
Yeah, because I think that the society that we live in today has been engendered to be a live for the moment society. Everything is must have it now, and then as soon as it's happened, it's gone. Forget it. It's in the past. Let's move on to the next thing. That's been a deliberately engendered ploy to keep people kind of unaware. If you make people unaware of their own history, that solves a lot of their problems.
Yeah, can
And that's
control their
exactly
future.
what they do. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was your book, The Falsification of History, that really got me sucked in,
Okay.
in particularly to Dresden, and then
All
I
right.
couldn't let it go. And as I was saying before, I hit the record button that in my first book, I actually referenced you and your work, and as in particularly on Dresden, because I thought it was
Okay.
important people understood. I don't
Mm,
think they've got any idea exactly how horrific the
no,
Allies' actions were.
absolutely.
Do you want to expand
Yeah,
upon
sure. Sure.
Dresden?
Yeah, yeah. It's a long time since I've looked at it, but I wrote Falsification of History in 20 between 2010 and 2011. It was published in 2012, very early 2012, and I've written 8 other books since then. So yeah, that was just my first go at it, if you like. But anyway, sorry, I'm getting off the point. Yeah, Dresden. For those who are not aware, um, it was horrific. It was absolutely horrific. They razed Dresden to the ground. The 2,000, at least 2,000 Allied bombers firebombed Dresden, which created something called a firestorm. A firestorm is when the air becomes so heated that it creates a hurricane, and that hurricane was sucking people hundreds of meters down the streets into the conflagration, which is the only way it can be described. And something like, nobody knows the exact figures, but in my view, from my research, I reckon that the figure of 400,000 to 500,000 deaths is about right. I know it's a very inaccurate one and it's still a guess, but I think, from what I've read and researched, I think that's probably accurate. And worse than that, eventually the alarm sounded, the all clear sounded, the bombers had gone. Everybody came out into this devastated streets, the few that were remaining. The heat was still so intense. They all made their way down to the banks of the River Elbe, which runs through Dresden, to try and get some relief from the cool waters of the Elbe. They congregated in the Elbe. By this time, the zoo had been destroyed, and all the zoo animals were down there as well: lions, tigers, elephants, you name it. And immediately uh, after that, there was a second raid, which had been designed exactly for that, for enticing everybody out into the streets. And this time it was low flying American fighter planes that machine gunned tens of thousands more to death. So it was just a horrific thing. Churchill had said, because what happened was Dresden was it's in the east of Germany. It was obviously one of the first major cities that the marauding Russian hordes encountered once they got into Germany. The raping and pillaging Soviet hordes, and people were escaping from Poland and from all places east into Germany. The first place that came to was Dresden, and it kind of doubled the population. So there was about 1.2 million people in Dresden at that time. When Churchill ordered the raids, which he did, he actually said, "I don't want any suggestions as to how to." God, my memory. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was along the lines of, "I just want suggestions of how to roast the 600,000 refugees in Dresden." That was straight from the horse's mouth. Those were his actual words. I can't remember the full quote, but that was the summation of the quote. So that was the kind of guy Churchill was, and that was what Dresden was all about. And Dresden was just it wasn't unique.
No.
Dresden was just an extreme example. The same happened in Berlin, the same happened in Hamburg, Dusseldorf. Many German cities were completely razed to rubble and firebombed. And, the idea was to kill as many German civilians as possible. And by the way, I'm getting on my hobby horse here a little bit. But people think, because that's what we're told by our media, our wonderful, truthful media,
Hmm.
that it was Hitler that started bombing civilians and we just retaliated. Just reverse that. It was exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. It was Churchill that decided to bomb civilians. Hitler pleaded with him through diplomatic channels at the time to stop because he didn't want to retaliate. Churchill ignored him and didn't even reply. It just continued. That's when the Blitz started. So, and the Blitz, by the way, was like a Sunday afternoon picnic compared to what happened to Germany. You know, horrible number of people died in the Blitz. Of course they did. I'm not, condoning that, but I'm just saying that compared to what Germany suffered, that was like a Sunday afternoon picnic.
Why do you think that there was this dire need to do this to the German civilians? Why do you think that happened?
Revenge. It was a revenge. Not revenge for anything that they'd done. It was revenge for the fact that Hitler was the number one demon. He had angered worldwide Jewry by first of all, mainly he shut the Reichsbank down. That was one of the first things that he did when he came into power. He shut the Reichsbank down. The Reichsbank being the German central bank, obviously Jewish owned by the Rothschilds, namely. And as soon as that happened, the Rothschilds started a massive anti-German propaganda campaign, using all their might, all their money, all their power, all their resources, and turned the entirety of world Jewry against Germany. And this had the effect of starting Jewish terrorist attacks on the German infrastructure. And this is why Hitler started the camps, the work camps, because it was to house Jewish terrorists who were indiscriminately murdering German politicians, German civil servants, even German innocent citizens. And it was a reaction to the action of the Jews, not the other way around. Everything is satanic reversal, isn't it? Satanic
Yes.
inversion. Don't believe the stuff that you hear about that. This is what I'm telling you is the truth. And it's not just my opinion. This is actually documented. So, I'm speaking with great authority on this. I'm not saying I found all this out myself. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here. I am, reiterating the research of other people who I respect and trust. So, it's not my opinion. I have no axe to grind. I don't care what the real truth is, other than the fact that it is the truth and it needs to be out there. Whatever the truth is, that's all I'm interested in. And I believe that absolutely 110% to be the truth.
No, I agree completely.
This is you can tell
Yeah.
this is a big hobby horse of mine, Nick. I'm
Yeah, no,
sure.
I'm there with you as well. Everything I've learned from research that I've done, and then reading the chapter on Dresden, for me was the icing on the cake.
Yeah,
I immediately stopped believing everything I was told about not just the Second World War, but the First World War, and I started
all
looking
connected.
into the Society of the Elect and
Yes,
Cecil Rhodes and the
yeah,
Rothschilds, and that seemed to be a propaganda-based situation too, where they just wanted to
absolutely.
stop Germany becoming a superpower.
Yeah. There's a quote from the lovely Winston Churchill. He said that Germany is too strong. We need to destroy her.
I
All
saw one
about
quote.
money.
Yeah, I did see a quote. I think it was an American politician who said something along the lines of "the only good German is a dead one."
Yeah. Absolutely.
From the falsification of history, was there a particular chapter in that pulled on your heartstrings like Dresden, or more so?
Hmm, good question. Yeah. Gosh, there's so much, as you know, there's so much stuff in there. It's really difficult to pinpoint one particular one. How about you? Was there one for you? I'll turn the question back on you, even
It
though it's
it
your
it,
interview.
it was Dresden. It was
Yeah,
Dresden. I
yeah,
read
okay.
that 3 or 4 times.
Right,
Um,
right, right.
I just kept. well, to start off with, I couldn't. I'm not saying I didn't believe it because I did. I'd already been looking into this, but
Yeah.
I just seeing it in black and white.
Mm,
I it it, it was a what lot worse than I imagined,
mm,
I then started to doubt everything I was told about Hitler, everything I
yeah.
was told about the cause of the Second World War, and then I
Yeah.
started to doubt actually what happened. And
Yes.
somebody said to me, "Oh, are you denying that what happened in the concentration camps?" And I said that don't go there. Like my granddad's Jewish, my mum's Jewish. Don't try that one on me. It's not gonna work.
Right.
Um, but I started looking at the figures and the numbers of what happened in the concentration camps and the gassing, and I thought, well, logistically, is that at all possible?
The maths
And I
don't work. The maths do not work.
no, I think they'd still be doing it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was a famous uh, Canadian, I think he was, guy who a crematoria expert who gave testimony in court at the trials of one of the Holocaust deniers. Of course, it was ignored, his testimony, but what he actually said was that given the technology of the day, he said those numbers are impossible. He said, you know, it takes at least 2 hours to burn one body today, he said, and there is no way those numbers could possibly have been cremated using the technology that they had in those days. And furthermore, he said he'd looked into, because the Germans were a very meticulous people, but they still are, aren't they? You know,
Yes.
they're very, very efficient, very, you know, German, yeah, great. And you know, he said that they're very meticulous, efficient people. They kept records of absolutely everything, and all those records were captured after the war. And some of them were examined publicly, others were locked away so that they couldn't be seen. But he said the ones that he saw, um, there were absolutely no evidence of the requisitioning of any, because what happens is when a body's cremated, it leaves a skeleton. It leaves a skeleton. The only way that you can get rid of the bones is to crush them. There has to be an implement, and I'm not sure what that is, for actually crushing bones. He says there was none of those. So, you know, what happened to these in Auschwitz specifically? What happened to those 4 million bodies? Those 4 million alleged bodies, which, by the way, even the authorities now say that the 4 million figure was inaccurate. First of all, they dropped it down to 2,500, and then they dropped it again to 2.5 million. Then they dropped it down to 1.5 million. And I believe that there are discussions taking place to actually reduce that to even further, to something like 750,000 Jews dead. But that figure, that sacrosanct 6 million figure, never ever is reduced to take account of those changes in the numbers of dead at Auschwitz, which is all rather suspicious and rather strange. But there you go. You can't use that argument because in most countries in Europe, it's actually illegal to deny the Holocaust. And if it's illegal to speak about any particular topic, you know, if that was the truth will defend itself. You know, the old saying, the truth is like a lion, let it loose and it will defend itself. The only way that you can keep a lie sacrosanct is by censorship and by punishing people who go against it. And this is, of course, this is what they do. I mean,
I
if
love
it
that.
was the truth, if it was the truth, then it would be self-evident. Truth is always self-evident.
I, 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 I love that saying. I've not heard that before, that the truth is like a lion. That's absolutely, well, it's perfect
Yeah,
because it's so true.
it
That's
is. Yeah.
exactly right. We don't need to defend the truth, but we do
No.
need to protect and defend a lie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Changing the subject just for a second, you were on
Sure.
Richard Vobes recently with your latest book.
Yes.
Now you
With
teamed up with somebody else. You have to forgive me. I
yeah,
can't remember the co-author's name, but you
yeah. It's Andy Ross. Yeah, Andy contacted me beginning of last year, and he said, "You're a Yorkshireman like me, John." He said, "I just thought I'd contact you." He says, "I don't expect you'll reply to me, but he said I've got an interesting idea for a book. I've never written one before, but I've got this great idea for a book, and I wondered if you might like to team up with me." And he sent me that email, and he never expected a reply. But I thought, wow, yeah, great, good on you, mate. So I emailed him, we swapped phone numbers, we had a phone call, and he outlined the plot of this book. And it's a novel. Okay, and I've been saying for years, because one of my friends said to me, gosh, it must be 3 or 4 years ago, you should write novels, John. Novels full of truth bombs, he said, because that's the way to get to people who would dismiss it if it was presented as the truth. And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. But of course, I was so busy I never got round to it. And then Andy, contacting me, just made me think, wow, yeah. And then when he outlined this plot, it was a very basic outline. I mean, we worked and worked and worked on it and absolutely filled it out. He told me this plot of the novel, and it was very basic, as I say. And I just thought, wow, yeah, that's great. And also, it would give me the opportunity to put my friend's words into practice and write. I had actually written another novel, but I always said I'll never do that again because it's so different to writing a factual book. You've got to create characters, you've got to create believable characters, you've got to create a plot line, you've got to create suspense, all the rest of it, and make it believable, and all the rest. But yeah, it was a great idea. And the outline, the plot of the book is, and I won't give too much away, is that, and this is the true bit. Okay, the book is called 60 Degrees South, with a subtitle, a tagline as they call it, of Beyond the Ice Wall. So 60 degrees south is the limit that we mere mortals can travel. Okay. Now, to put that in perspective, I live at 53 degrees north. Okay, I live at Scarborough on the northeast coast, and that is 53 degrees north. So in the southern hemisphere, 7 degrees below where I live is the limit to where you can travel. What do I mean by the limit? The limit is patrolled. Okay, so if you try and go beyond 60 degrees south by sea, you will be turned back by UN gunboats. If you try to travel by air beyond 60 degrees south, you will be turned back by UN fighter planes. And if you don't obey their instructions, you will be blown out of the water, you will be blown out of the sky. That's not for question. That is absolute fact. So this is what the book is based on. It's about these RAF pilots who are seconded to this UN unit on King George Island, which is 62 degrees south. It's about 500 miles off Tierra del Fuego, which is at the very tip of South America, 500 miles south of that. And they are part of this group that are engaged to intercept planes that are trying to encroach beyond the 60th parallel. And eventually, to cut a very long story short, they start to realize that what they're doing, something very strange about it. Why are they there? They're the military men. They're not really allowed to question orders, but it sets them thinking, and it starts to wake them up. And it's about their waking up process and what happens next. I won't go into details, but it's a rip roaring adventure, as they say. And they do go beyond the ice wall, and they do go south, and it's what happens to them then. And we've sold massive amounts. It's just exceeded our expectations, and the feedback we get is invariably, it's just amazing. People say, "Wow, what a book! Best book I've ever read. Stayed up all night to read it." Stuff like that.
Oh, that's fantastic. What more could you want?
No, exactly. It's just brilliant. It's absolutely full to the brim with truth bombs. It's, so anybody who reads it who isn't a conspiracy nut like us, where hopefully will think to themselves, wow, is this all true? Is this stuff real? And start to do a little bit of research of their own. And it's just another way of really trying to get the message across to people. And it's very gratifying. And we've just this very week, in fact, I broke off this now to talk to you. We've just started on the book again. Andy started a couple of days ago. I started today on the sequel.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah.
So we'll
So
see
yeah,
that soon.
it's fantastic, honestly. Yeah.
So obviously, I know you can get your books on Amazon, but
Yeah,
we can get them directly from you as well.
you can get signed copies from myself, from my website, which is falsificationofhistory.co.uk. There's a shop on there, and you can buy signed copies on there of all my books. If you don't want to use the dreaded Amazon,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just a necessary evil, I'm afraid.
yeah. It is. And Richard had somebody on his channel called Mark Devlin. I'm sure you should know Mark Devlin.
I
I
know,
know
yeah,
of
I'm
him.
good mates with Mark. In fact, me and Mark are at a conference on Saturday in Huddersfield.
How are you?
Um, yeah, with do you know the Sheep Farm podcast?
Yeah, yeah. I've been on a
Yeah,
couple of times. Yeah, with
yeah,
Dom. Yeah,
Dom and Chris. There's Dom and
yeah.
Chris, me and Mark. We're doing a day's conference in Huddersfield. It's all sorry to disappoint anybody who wanted to come along, maybe, but yeah, it's all booked up. We've sold about 100, I think it's 140 tickets from memory. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Should be a great day, and staying over a couple of nights, staying over on the Friday and Saturday night with the missus. And yeah, it's a lovely hotel right on the moors just outside Huddersfield. So it'll be good.
Yeah, I love
Yeah, so
Huddersfield.
I know Mark.
Great
I know
fun.
Mark from I know Mark must be 12 years, something like that. Before he ever became famous, or before I ever became famous, not I'm not famous, but he was actually doing a talk up north, and he stayed with us one night, and we went out for a meal and got to know each other then, and our paths have crossed many times in the years since then. So yeah.
He said something quite interesting that when you when you look at Kindle ebooks, Kindle in particular on Amazon, that
Mm.
Kindle could well be named after kindling, and
Mm.
that is what you would use to start a fire, specifically to burn books.
Yeah, that's a good
And
point, isn't it?
what a strange name to have called
Yeah.
their ebook service, Kindle, and
Mm.
um, and it then begged the question that what you submit to KDP or Amazon Publishing for your Kindle or ebook today might not be what people are reading in 6 months' time.
It's very true. They could just change the whole sense of it, which has been done. It was done with one specific example I can think of was Animal Farm, George Orwell. That the original, and I've written about that in my book Behind the Curtain, but I've got so much information up here, Guy. It blows my head off sometimes. But from memory, I did write about it, and the ending of Animal Farm now is completely different to the way that George Orwell wrote it. It's the opposite of what he intended. And I can't remember the details, so don't question me on it. But if you read my book Behind the Curtain, it's in there.
You also wrote another book that nearly became a movie. You
Oh,
flew
I
out
did.
to yeah, you flew out
Nearly.
to flew out to America to to have discussions about that,
Yeah.
didn't you?
Well, funnily enough, this book we've just been talking about, 60 Degrees South. Not long into that, we were talking about it on podcasts even before it was finished, and we got contacted by this independent TV producer. Genuine guy, I've checked his background, and he'd got a lot of serious projects on TV, and he'd done a lot of stuff. And he said he'd love to make a TV series of this. Could we turn it into a series? And I said, oh yeah, absolutely. And that was all going ahead until he'd had a copy of the draft copy of the book and everything, and right up until the point when it was published, it was all going ahead. And then he unfortunately, the funding rug was pulled from under him for whatever reason, and I can't imagine why.
Right. So
So
very
yeah, so
similar
that
to
was that.
America.
But yeah, the one that you're referring to was way back in the midst of time, something like 2011-ish. I did a presentation which went on YouTube about my version of the Titanic story. I'm saying my version of the Titanic story. I mean, I'm only one person that has come to this conclusion. It's not my original idea, but there's a lot of unique stuff that I've put in there. Yeah, so I did a presentation about the real truth behind the Titanic, and it went viral. Within about 2 months, it had 500,000 views on YouTube, and it was picked up by a film director in Hollywood. Not a very famous one, granted. She was just a minor film director, but I didn't believe who she was at first. I thought, this person's pulling my leg. But she contacted me and said, can I call you? So I agreed to a call, and I thought, this is some kind of a ruse. Anyway, so I went along with it, and eventually, after a couple more calls, I kind of believed what she's saying. So she invited me out to Hollywood. I spent 2 weeks with her in this ranch in the Hollywood Hills, and we spent some time going around film producers out there to try and raise money. Nobody was interested, of course. Wonder why? Can't imagine. And yeah, except for one guy, right? And one guy said, "Yeah, it's great, that. Yeah, it is. But we need a book." I said, "All right." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Need a book, and then send me the draft, and we'll look at it again." So I went away, all excited, came back home, and I burned the midnight oil for about 6 weeks, and wrote a book called RMS Olympic, which is the real truth about the Titanic.
Yeah.
And I sent him the draft, and he got back to me fairly quickly. He said, "No, no, no, no." He says, "We need a novel." I said, "Oh, God. All right, okay." So then set to work again, and in record time again. I'd never done this before, so it was a real onerous task as far as I was concerned. I actually wrote a book called Titanic's Last Secret, which was a novel based on RMS Olympic. And yeah, I mean, that's been reasonably successful. But I sent him the draft of that. He got back to me again straight away, said, "Yeah, I've changed my mind. So I'm not really interested anymore. I've got other projects I need to be doing, blah, blah, blah." But it kind of gave me the impetus to write 2 books. So, it wasn't wasted effort, but it was disappointing nevertheless.
Do you
But
think he
yeah,
was gutted?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's likely, isn't it? It's likely. Yeah.
Where are
You
you
can't
with
totally.
the ice walls then? What do you think that there are unknown lands beyond them?
I definitely do think there are unknown lands beyond them. There are lots and lots of little snippets of evidence, not least of which is Admiral Byrd. I think most people out there who've got any inkling of the truth about anything have heard of Admiral Richard Byrd and his expeditions to Antarctica. And of course, he comes into the story as well, the 60 degrees south. But yeah, I mean, he described a land. One of the things he said in his famous TV interview was that there's an area beyond the pole that is much larger than the United States that's never been seen by man. And you know what? People quote Admiral Byrd's diary to me, but I'm not sure about that. I actually think that is a psyop. Because it's too fantastic for words. He talks about meeting a race of people, and his plane being taken over and
Yeah.
landed automatically, and meets this strange race of people. I don't know. I just find that too far-fetched. And knowing the amount of disinformation that there is out there, I do take that with a pinch of salt. I think that was kind of a publicity stunt of some kind. It was only published after his death, by the way, by his son. Maybe his son did it for the money or whatever. I don't know. But I do find that particular element of it to be very hard to believe. But that's just me. It might be true.
Do you think that there's a lot of focus on Antarctica? Do you think that the Arctic is something that we should be looking at equally?
Um, yeah, I mean the Arctic is not as restricted. I mean, as far as I'm aware, you can go to the Arctic. There is no kind of parallel that you cannot cross. But yeah, you're certainly not encouraged to go to the Arctic. And as far as I'm aware, some people out there might contradict me on this. As far as I'm aware, no plane routes fly over the Arctic. When it would be on a globe, it would be the quickest way to go, but that doesn't happen. There is a famous map, which there's a facsimile of it in the book, of that hangs actually in the lobby of the UN building in New York. Have you ever seen this map?
Yes, I
Yeah,
have. Yeah.
and just for those people who've not seen it, if you imagine the flat Earth map, but it's the bit that we know is just in a tiny little corner at the bottom, and the rest of it is just there's dozens and dozens of other continents and oceans outside of that. Now, why would that be hanging in the UN lobby? because they love to hide things in plain sight, don't they?
Yeah.
That's one of their characteristics, one of their hobbies. So yeah,
Yeah.
it kind of begs the question. Again, I don't take anything, for granted. It could just be bluff and double bluff. Who knows? But it's interesting nevertheless.
So you're writing a sequel now.
Yeah,
When do you think you'll have that ready?
hopefully by the end of the year, because now we've done the first one, we've got a great basis. We don't have to think too much about all the mechanics of the geography of it, if you like. So there's it's a, and when you've done something once, it's a lot easier to replicate it. Not that it's going to be exactly the same. It's another element of the story, but yeah, it should be a lot quicker. We're hoping to get it out before the end of the year, but knowing how these things work, it'll probably be early 2026 at the latest, I would say.
Is there anything you're currently looking into that we're not, that's something that might not be on other people's radar?
No, I'm just so busy at the moment, guy. Honestly, I don't have time to research at the moment. Sometimes someone will send me something interesting and I'll take a look at it, but I honestly don't have too much time to go into it in depth. I'm just kind of running at full speed just to stand still at the moment. It's just crazy, but fun, but fun.
So what do you think the future holds for us with Agenda 21, Agenda 30? Where do you think this is going? Do you think we're going to come out of this alive the other end?
Yeah, it's a $64,000 question, isn't it?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, again, it's only going to be my opinion. I don't have an adamant viewpoint on it. But personally speaking, as this fatalist, I believe that whatever will happen. And I do actually believe that good will triumph over evil in the end. And I believe that these entities know this and they're fighting for their lives. So I'm not saying be complacent. Don't worry, Q's not coming to save us or anything like that. Um, but just be aware and alert as to what is going on and try and make as much countermeasures as you can to combat the tactics that they're using. I know we're kind of powerless in a way, in many ways. There's not a lot we can do, but just in little ways, look after your family, look after yourself. I actually think it will be okay in the end. But whether the end is in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 20 years' time, 100 years' time, I ain't got a clue. All I know is that it will be all be okay in the end. And I don't want to. I would actually plead with everybody out there not to let it get you down. Just as I said before, you know, live for your friends, love your family, enjoy life. When every morning when you wake up, think, what a beautiful day. I wonder what today will bring. And just stuff all this nonsense to the back of your heads and let them get on with it because at the end of the day, good will triumph.
If you could bring somebody back from the past for an hour to sit with you and you could ask them anything at all, who would you bring back?
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. JFK.
That's a good one.
JFK. I've written a book about him as well, by the way, about his assassination. Well, not just about his assassination, but about his life as well. Yeah, I mean, he wasn't perfect. Don't get me wrong. I don't think he was an absolute model human being by any stretch of the imagination. He had many faults, as we all do. But he knew what was going on. He was naive in many ways. I think he thought he could get away with trying to do down the establishment. I think he thought as president he was in charge, but it really wasn't. Um, so yeah, I would just love to know the real background behind all that stuff. I mean, I've written a lot of stuff and I've unearthed a lot of stuff about the JFK assassination, but I'd just love to have his viewpoint on that. I would love to hear that exactly what he believes led to that. You know.
I saw some weird footage at a talk I was doing called Truth Juice in Birmingham, and at the end,
Yeah,
this
I've
guy,
spoken there a few times. Yeah,
have you at the
yeah, yeah.
social club?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
Great venue. Lovely
yeah,
people. Yeah. Andy and his
Andy.
missus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't remember her name, Andy. Yeah,
No, no,
I
I
met
can't.
this. I met this guy there that he said to me at the end, "There's something I want to show you." He said, "I can't send it to you, and I daren't send it to you, but I'll show you it." And he showed me some footage where actually JFK, that they're in the car,
Mhm.
and his wife actually leans over and pops him through, literally under his
Really?
chin. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And then the
Wow.
gun went out of her hand, rolled back, and she climbed over to try and retrieve the gun. But the problem is now, the AI, and we
Yeah,
don't know
exactly.
what we're seeing, do we?
No, honestly, at one point in time, you could actually believe what you saw, but not
Mm,
necessarily what you heard. But now, even that's gone by the board because of technology, like you say, AI, CGI, all the rest of it. You cannot believe images. I mean, 9/11 was an excellent example of that. The planes hitting the building were obviously CGI. There were no planes, not in the way that they tell us anyway. It was all CGI. And I, interesting point on that. I'm digressing slightly, but if you don't mind me just rambling for another couple of minutes.
no.
When I was investigating 9/11 to write my piece in Falsification of History for it, I didn't actually use any of the kind of the story as such. I just talked about the background to it and why it happened. But because it's been done to death by the time I got to write Falsification of History in 2010, 11, it'd been done to death. So I looked at it from a different angle. But anyway, digressing on my digression here. Um, I actually contacted a guy who, it was somebody that I knew and he knew him, kind of thing. And they put me in touch. And this was a guy who, in the days and weeks after 9/11, in fact, I think it took him a whole year, he interviewed people in the streets of New York. And he asked, the first question he asked them was, were you in the city on 9/11? And all the ones that said yes, he questioned them a little bit further. And without going into too much detail, the main question he asked them was, did you see any planes? Did you see any planes hit the buildings? And 100% of them said, no, there were no planes. There were no planes. The building just exploded. Never heard a plane, never saw a plane. The planes did not exist. All the images that we see are carefully prepared CGI.
People don't talk about the third building either.
WTC 7, no, or indeed WTC 6. How many people have heard of WTC 6?
No, not me.
Exactly. Right. WTC 7, I think a lot of people do know about that. A lot of people don't. But WTC 7, for those who are not aware, was the one that collapsed that it wasn't hit by a plane. And it was also announced as having collapsed by the BBC 25 minutes before it actually did. But yeah, WTC 6 is very interesting. There's a book called Where Did the Towers Go by Dr. Judy Wood, which again is a brilliant piece of research, absolutely stunning piece of research. And she showed a picture, an aerial picture in her book of WTC 6. It looked from above exactly as though someone had got a giant apple corer, stuffed it into the building, twisted it, and pulled out the entire center of the building. From the outside, WTC 6 looked as though it was intact. But from the top, it was hollowed all the way down. What the hell caused that? She reckoned it was direct energy weapons. I don't know, but I mean, it's probably direct energy weapons that brought the towers down. That's what she believes anyway. But there's all sorts of speculation theories on that, so it's hard to discern fact from fiction. But interesting, nevertheless. I always mention WT6 when C6 when someone mentions 7. So
It's the
there you
first time I've heard.
go. Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you so much for giving up your time for me. I really appreciate that. And what the
That's
best
my
way to
pleasure. Don't worry.
thank you. So the best way for people to get hold of your work is probably
Mm.
directly from your website,
Yeah, obviously, wherever you are in the world, Amazon.
Amazon.
I can only send signed copies in the UK, by the way. So I'm sorry to disappoint anybody who's abroad and wants a signed copy. But the way that my website works, it will be too difficult to calculate shipping costs depending on how many books you bought and where you are. the software would be just ridiculously complex to be able to do that. So I can only send within the UK, unfortunately. But yeah, my website, as I said, falsificationofhistory.co.uk. There's a shop on there. You can use pay by card and you'll get a signed copy in return. Amazon, otherwise, wherever you are in the world, or if you prefer to buy from Amazon, that's fine. I don't care. Yeah, so I've got a Twitter account if anybody wants to follow me on Twitter, and it's at John Hamer Author. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. And
You're very welcome.
hopefully we'll have you back on again soon.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to come back. Yeah, I'm sure there's a million more topics we could cover, that guy. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, I bet there are as well. I can think of a few. Thank you
Yeah,
once again, John, and I
welcome,
hope you
mate.
enjoy the rest
Welcome.
of your day.
You too. All the best to you.
Take care.
Bye.